Fortum and Tiina from Fortum, who's here to talk about the future of Nordic nuclear development.
Okay, there. All right. Hey, good afternoon. My name is Tiina Tuomela, coming from Fortum, heading there our generation business, and I try to bring the nuclear operators' point of view to the future of nuclear and the Nordic, where we operate in the open market model. But let me start with briefly telling about Fortum. So we are the Nordic power company. Two-thirds of our production comes from the hydro and nuclear. And in Europe, we are one of the cleanest power producer. 1/3 of our production comes from combined heat and power, gas, mostly in Russia. And then we have a growing portfolio of wind. We have 2.5 million customers in the Nordics, and then we also provide heat. Also here in Stockholm, very warm now, so not selling much. And then in Oslo and in Espoo. We have a strong presence in the Nordic. Roughly half of our production in the Nordic is coming from nuclear. We have Loviisa, our fully owned power plant. And then we have the co-ownership in Olkiluoto, Forsmark and Oskarshamn. The capacity is roughly 3,000 megawatts. The age of our fleet is 40 years, so still roughly 20 years to go with the technical lifetime. And actually, I'm really proud how our fleet is performing. So last year, availability of the fleet was 90%, a bit over 90%, and we made the production records in quite many plants, in Loviisa 1, Olkiluoto 1, and then in Oskarshamn. And I think this is due that we have constantly invested to the nuclear power plants so that they are in the good shape. Nuclear has a very important role also in the Nordic market. So overall, the share of the nuclear in the Nordic is roughly 20%. Otherwise, we could say that the Nordic is very hydro-dominated market. So over 50% is coming from hydro, flexible, CO2-free, beautiful production form. The only thing is that the annual production varies quite a lot. 20% plus minus, because sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't rain. And therefore I think the fit with the nuclear is very, very good. Because that's the perfect match to bring the reliable energy to the system. The same comes with the wind. Wind is currently somewhere a bit more than 10%. The share is increasing, but the same thing, sometimes it's blowing, other time it's not blowing, so nuclear really fits nicely to the system. In general, I think in the Nordic, roughly 85% or more is CO2 free, so we have quite nice balance if we compare, for example, the Baltics or other countries in Europe. So if we try to and aim to achieve the climate targets, I think we have a long way to go, even some work in the Nordics. So in the picture there, so we can see that what is the target, what should be the rate, how we reduce the emission to achieve this 1.5 degree target. And then the dotted line tells us where we currently are. So I think we really need to continue to work, increasing the amount of the renewables. And there I think the nuclear also plays a very important role. I think in the IPCC scenarios, these 1.5 scenarios, in all of them they say that the amount of nuclear should actually increase by 2 to 5 times. But I think that to decarbonize the power sector is still not enough. In this picture, we have the CO2 emissions in the EU. So 5 million or 5,500 million tons CO2. And actually, the amount of CO2 coming from energy and industry, which are currently included in the ETS system, is roughly half or even a bit less than half. And now with the Green Deal and the targets, so we plan to reduce the amount of the CO2 to the zero. We can recognize that there is a big part of CO2 still in the system, which means that also other sectors need to contribute to the, let's say, to the mitigating the climate change. Transportation, buildings, agriculture. So let me share one example how the industry could, in a way, join to the party. So steel industry has done a lot of work to decarbonize and to use energy more efficiently in the past 50 years. So the amount of energy has been reduced by 50%. But still, if we look at the amount of the CO2 emissions coming from the steel industry, so it's roughly 7% of the total global emission, which actually is quite close to the total emission of the EU. So very, very significant amount. So we can see that the share of industry and what is done in the industry is very important. There are projects, Vattenfall, our dear colleague in the market, is doing excellent work with the SSAB to look at how to decarbonize the steel industry, which would mean that the amount of electricity need is increasing a lot. The estimate for in the EU level is that amount of need for electricity could be even more than 100% to decarbonize the EU. So I think in this context, if we look at that do we need nuclear? Yes, we do nuclear. I think we need all the production forms, CO2 production forms, to get these targets. So how could nuclear exploit and how could we utilize nuclear better in the future? I think we need several actions. We need that nuclear is competitive. We utilize the full lifetime of the nuclear, and then we need the innovation and new technologies. I think from the nuclear's point of view, it's very important that there is the level of fair level of playing in the market, so that the nuclear is treated in the similar way than the other industries. Same with the taxes, same with the R&D, and also with the financing. What's happening with the financing, sustainable financing, so very worrying news that nuclear would be excluded. Nuclear is CO2 free, but the issue many times is the spent fuel. And in the Nordics, I think we have a solution. In Finland, we have made the decision to print the encapsulation plan and the repository, and therefore I think it would be very important for Sweden also to proceed with the decision. What comes to the lifetime extensions, so many studies show that the most efficient and economical way is to utilize the current asset what we have. And I think in the Nordics we have good fleet operating well, safely, so we should utilize them. And after the lifetime, what is at the end, assess whether we should, in a way, extend the lifetime even further. And then new technologies and innovation. What's happening in nuclear? I think if we look at what is happening in the wind, solar, many industries, a lot of development going on. I think we need to get this also moving. And SMR, I think, is one very potential area. So how to make smaller reactors, smaller capital cost, smaller construction cost, more flexibility, interesting opportunity. But that requires that the legislation and the requirements are harmonized. Then I think that also there is a lot of potential with the current fleet. And let me share one example. So this is a real example actually from Finland. So we have a car, roughly 30,000 components, and quite many of us think that the car, it needs to be safe when we drive. The cost of the car is 19,000. If we take one component, the valve plug from the power plant, no nuclear safety classification, the price 21,000. If we take 64 bolts and nuts, safety class 2, the cost is 20,000. And we think, how can this be? The very same bolts, if we go to the grocery or the store, costs 160 euros. The between is the papers, our qualification papers, how to get all the acceptance for our own requirements. And we can continue. Qualification of individual cable fitting, 250,000. Basic design of simple component. Qualification of the software of the protective relay, very expensive. So the one issue is that how to make the qualification process more efficient and more simple. We have started in Finland with all the nuclear operators and the regulators took the project, where we try to harmonize and standardize the qualification process so that we use the industrialized quality products where the nuclear operators do the nuclear qualification. We are taking small steps, but I think there is a lot of potential. Then I would like to finally raise one issue, what is very important from the operator's point of view. It's the people and competencies. Our nuclear power plants only works if we have good people, competent people, and therefore I'm really pleased that we Nordic nuclear operators have jointly started the training program where we try to attract new young generation to the field, show that it's interesting place to work in the Nordic nuclear fleet, and in that way also attract people and competencies. So to summarize, I think nuclear is very important part of the future energy mix. We need to ensure the competitiveness of the old fleet, new fleet, by utilizing the best practices, harmonize, have a speed in the development, and then make sure that we have the policies, practices similar to nuclear and all the other CO2-free production forms. Thank you.
Thanks, Tiina. Holy cow, those are striking numbers there with the bolts. I was taken aback.
Expensive bolts, yes.
Oh, wow, Christ, yeah. So I want to start with just the current political climate in the Nordic countries. I think you have an inside knowledge of how that affects you as a company. So my question is, do you think there's been sort of is this a political discussion purely, or has some fundamental thing or things, have they changed underlying this political upsurge and interest in nuclear energy?
Well, I think that it's quite interesting to compare Finland and Sweden, where we both where we operate. So I think in Finland in general, the nuclear acceptance and attitude towards nuclear is very positive. And I think one example is that even the Green Party in Finland is supporting lifetime extension of the nuclear, and even some younger generation supporting for new nuclear, SMRs and so. So I think that in Finland, probably there's a bit more pragmatic view, seeing that, okay, how to decarbonize, get the CO2-free production, and how to get the energy, because I think the one big difference is that in Finland we are importing nearly 25% of the electricity. Whether we import it in from the neighboring countries or whether we do it our own. So I think there is some in a way acceptance that we also increase our own production. I think in Sweden it has been really exciting the last days. And I'm happy that the nuclear and the nuclear's role is discussed, and also recognized that, okay, actually Sweden is nearly 100% CO2 free, nuclear and renewable. What a beautiful match. So why don't we utilize that?
So then I'd like to nick a question that we got just before lunch around the electricity market. So, you know, common argument against nuclear is, well, if this is so beautiful, as you say, and so cheap, why are not people investing? And one answer to that, if I preempt, is that the current market design is not set up in the correct way, so that the value of certain technologies like nuclear is not incentivized. Do you agree with that statement, or do you think that the current market design is actually, you know, well suited for nuclear, and if not, how should that be reformed?
Well, I think that in general we should build the energy forms, CO2-free ones, which are competitive. If the wind is competitive, we build wind. We should get the nuclear also competitive. I think that sometimes what is a bit scary, that if nuclear, for example, is not allowed to get the financing, or if there is a special tax for nuclear, or nuclear is not getting the same R&D input. So to have the, in a way, similar treatment for nuclear than other CO2-free technologies. Let the market drive. Have the carbon has a price. And if the carbon price is high enough, I think that also makes possible to make the investment.
So do you think that that's not the case now, or do you think that actually the market now is functioning?
I think market is functioning. Okay, if we get this restriction for the financing, it does not work. But
you mean the EU taxonomy?
Exactly.
Okay.
But I think in general in the Nordic market is functioning. In Finland we are building nuclear.
So getting to that mid part of the slide, there you had lifetime extensions.
Yep.
Of course, that's some years away, at least in Sweden now. So how far in advance would you need to take that decision in order to make the investment necessary to extend the lifetime of the current fleet that you at least partly own in Sweden?
Well, I think we still have quite a lot of time, so we have 20 years to go. But of course, then after 10 years, 15 years, so of course it's important to see that what kind of investment is required, whether it's economical, what is the safety systems working and so forth. But I think there is good.
So we're
good
talking
time.
sort of 3-4 years before the planned shutdown?
Maybe a bit more.
Just to get a sense
exactly,
of the urgency of the issue here.
Well, I think the in Loviisa, our own power plant, so the current licenses are until 2027 and 2030. And currently we are starting to do the periodic safety assessment. So, 7 years before we do the assessment and we see that what is the best way.
And then finally, we've heard the word Mankala model mentioned several times here last by Tom. So could you just a couple of minutes on what that is and perhaps if it could be applied in Sweden? Yeah.
Okay. So Mankala model, I think the name Mankala is actually the tax decision that the company can make zero profit. And in Mankala model is that the co-owners invest to the power station, they share the cost, and then they get the amount of electricity based on the ownership at the cost. So it's in a way sharing the ownership, and I think that has allowed in Finland us to make rather big investments like nuclear investment. It's not only nuclear, we are doing also that in other production forms in hydro as well. So share the risk and then get the financing actually from the external market as well, because the owners are committed to buy the power. And I think that has been quite good way to also industry, because industry, paper mills, steel mills, they want to secure that what is the electricity price. So they will participate to the investment. So that has been one way to have access, because otherwise it's difficult to start to be the power producer. But if there's a professional operator, they bring in their money, participate to the investment and get the power. I think the alternative way, of course, is to make the long-term power purchase agreement. But somehow you can also influence a bit more. So we have paper mills, steel mills, owners of nuclear power plants.
Thank you very much, Tiina. Thanks for coming and all the best.
Thank you.
Thanks.